I'd like to thank those who wanted me to come here in Rome tonight to give this lecture, as this is the first one since This is not Leonardo da Vinci has been translated in English. Most of you know me by following me on the Via Blue channel, and I'm pleased that today they're recording the conference. So tonight we'll talk about a different Leonardo, different from what I like to define as a myth of papier-mâché. Why? Because on Leonardo has been put a mask, that is the mask of human hypocrisy. Why do I say this? Because beyond one reality, which is the one that you mostly hear, there is an infinity of realities, based on the personal way of seeing things, on the culture of reference, on what is convenient to tell or not. So what we know today, and what still gets repeated on the main cultural channels of public television, or on the thematic channels, is the fruit of a big lie, of a narrative that has been built over centuries. And today we will see how it was formed, why it was formed, and what actually lies beneath this informative deformation. We obviously won't be talking only about Leonardo. Leonardo is the most prominent figure of his period. In fact, he was a true cultural reference point for his contemporaries, because he took the baton from another character who was the absolute reference of the Renaissance movement, a character of which never enough is spoken of, Plato. It is thought that the Renaissance starts from the discovery of the Americas by Christopher Columbus in 1492, but in reality, the Renaissance starts with the beginning of the 15th century, thanks to Pandolfo Malatesta III, who developed a form of patronage. He does it in conjunction with Martin V. For example, it was the painter Gentile da Fabriano that was taken around the coasts of Brescia and Lecco. I come from Lecco, and part of the Renaissance history, which nobody tells you in books, starts from the so-called High Lake, lake to which Leonardo will then dedicate much of his attention. Therefore, we cannot talk about Leonardo out of context, but we have to open a window on the whole Renaissance period. And I don't allude only to an artistic point of view, which is clearly what makes the strength of Rome, of Florence, and of the entire Italian artistic heritage that the whole world envies us. We need to analyze what the political, economic, financial, and cultural developments have been. As it's them who have sowed the seed for the modern society, a corrupt society that has lost any kind of ideals and that has created a structure, I would say a superstructure, of cultural references that are totally false. And they have been the prelude of a system based on false information. For example, on the denigration of the opponent. So what was supposed to be a cohesive system based on nature as a whole, it has become an increasingly fractionated system where the parts are opposed to each other, where the contents have lost completely their importance, and whoever shouts the loudest has biggest chance of imposing his own ideas. So the analysis that we are going to do on Leonardo will become an analysis of the whole period that will help us to understand also the current society. It's not possible to understand today's politics and economy if we don't understand what happened in the Renaissance. There is a missing piece of growth and evolution. It's like knowing a child and meeting him again 50 years later and thinking you know him. But you don't. So what we'll be doing tonight is to look at things from another point of view, which is also a graphic painting technique developed by Beato Angelico first, Donatello and then, and resumed by Leonardo himself and by Dürer, which is called anamorphosis. Therefore, changing a point of observation of an object, it will assume a completely different meaning. The main example here is the Ambassador by Holbein, where there is a scar drawn at the feet of the two ambassadors, which can only be seen in its entirety by moving away from a frontal observation. So what we're going to do tonight is to change the point of observation to see how everything that we know today about our history and art is completely distorted by necessity of those who impose a certain culture that was opposed to what was the root of the Renaissance movement. I'm talking about the Neoplatonism of pagan origins. We'll start from a song that was used for public TV screenplay on the life of Leonardo da Vinci, which is perhaps still today the best screenplay that has been made. Starting from this song, we will completely decompose Leonardo and Renaissance to recompose them in a more correct form. So this song is presented as a love song written by Leonardo da Vinci. It then became the soundtrack of the TV script of the 70s, when the public TV was still doing good works. It was set to music by Roman Vlad, who was a Romanian composer and music critic of the time, and was sung by Ornella Vanoni. Roman Vlad to music these lyrics, which obviously it's not a love song, used one of the 171 musical rebuses in which Leonardo played associating words and notes. So love amuses me in this specific case. I repeat, this is only one of the 171 musical rebuses written by Leonardo. So Roman Vlad did nothing but close his eyes, picked out a number, and associated it to a text written by Leonardo, and music composed by him. But there is a problem. But there is a problem is my trademark. Because I always find problems. This is the lyrics of The Lover Moves. The text is contained in one of the minor codex, the Tributian Codex, that is preserved in the library of the Sforza Castle. As I was saying, there is a problem, which is the one that Paola will now highlight to us.
The lover moves for the belonged thing, like the leading note and the subtonic, and the joint making one same thing. The work is the first thing that is born from the union. If the beloved thing is vile, the lover becomes vile. When the united thing is convenient for its uniter, delight and pleasure and satisfaction follow. When the lovers reach the beloved, there he rests. When the mass is laid, there he rests. The thing known by our intellect.
So what you see written in blue are the words that were sung by Ornella Vanoni. And have been traced back to the love song written by Leonardo. The complete text, though, with the addition written in white, it actually assumes a completely different meaning, and it is essential to understand not only Renaissance art, but music and everything that happens in the universe. Because the universe is made by duality, by two opposing forces, always and however. We're used to think of good and evil, light and shadow, heaven and hell, but in reality it's a duality of energy. One ascendant and one descendant that always coexists, always and however. This dual system, which is composed of vibrations, is translated by man through music since ever. Or at least, it was translated by man in music up to a certain point in history, because from the Renaissance onwards, thanks also to whom wanted to deny this kind of knowledge, music became only a recreational aspect. But until the end of the Renaissance, music was nothing more than the way in which the man narrated or made perceive to the hearing the vibration system that determines the form and life of everything that lies in the universe. In a very clean and linear way. So those lines that have been removed from the lyrics of The Lover Moves are the leading note and the subtonic, which in music are two fundamental notations that are linked to the tonic and the dominant, and they are, or determine, the harmonization between two different notes, giving a sense of vertical elevation to what until then was in music a completely horizontal meaning. Music was composed for superimposition of harmonies and not for single chords, which are the chords of unison, octave, third, fourth, etc. I need to be careful here because I'm not a musician. But then I find myself talking about these things and it's paradoxical and it amazes me a lot. It amazes me that Vlad has not come to such a conclusion before me, and that anyone who has analyzed these aspects of Leonardo before me didn't get to this conclusion. When the united thing is convenient for its joiner, delight and pleasure and satisfaction follow. Ascending movement. If the beloved thing is vile, the lover becomes vile. Descending movement. To give you a tangible example, Bach, composer known by everyone as a master of counterpoint music. Bach is a stage name. It's like if Maradona had been called Bachhill, because Bach, in the Teutonic notation, B-A-C-H, is a B-flat, A, C, high B. It is the B, the leading note, and the subtonic, which approaches the C or the A, depending on whether the movement is ascendant or descendant. Verdi in La Traviata speaks of love that is the heartbeat of the universe. It's the home. When the lover has reached the beloved, there it rests. The harmonic tension falls completely. It means that harmony becomes harmonious. The work is the first thing that is composed from the union. The work is not intended as the musical work, that too, but the work is the first emanation of the monad, the syzygy, the androgynous, the male energy and the female energy combined. Which one is the most outstanding example of the work? The Gioconda. Pay attention here, not the Mona Lisa, but the Gioconda. Because the Mona Lisa is not this painting. It is not the one exhibited at the Louvre. The portrait that Leonardo made to Lisa Gherardini is not the one exposed at the Louvre, despite millions of people go constantly to observe it. They're not full. The problem is that all the museums are full of people who go to see things that do not correspond to what we associate them with. Because everything is associated by convenience, a cultural convenience affected by knowledge. You will see many other examples. So the work is the androgynous, which is the element in which male energy and the female energy, those two energies that make up the dual universe, are in perfect balance. so much that Leonardo wrote that the disunited things will unite and will receive within them the virtue that will give back the lost memory to man. The lost memory, which is the pre-carnal condition, the ethereal or spiritual one. Heraclitus said, or at least he wrote, what is opposition is accord, and from discordant things spring beautiful harmony. And all things happen according to strife and necessity. The reference is again to the duality of the universe. There is not a coin without its backside. All things happen according to strife and necessity. The harmony Heraclitus talks about is the system of vibration I mentioned before, which gives form and life to all what the universe is made of. It is what Dante called love that moves the sun and the other stars, and what Verdi in La Traviata described as heartbeat through the universe. It was Virgil and then Caravaggio defined as amor vincit omnia. It is not love conquers all, as again it gets wrongly translated, but it is love that binds everything. It is that vibration, love, which gives form and life to everything that lies in the universe. The matter is solidified music, Pythagoras said. What you can see here is a detail of a painting by Verrocchio in collaboration with Leonardo, called Tobias and the Angel. The hands of Raphael and Tobias are depicted in a mirror chord. In the center, the two chords unite. Again, what is opposition is accord, and from discordant things spring beautiful harmony. This is to stress on how Renaissance art is not the one that you get told, where the Catholic iconography prevails. Renaissance art, the early Renaissance, that is the Renaissance that you are not told about because it comes prior to 1492, hence of the discovery of the America, talks about a completely different knowledge, one that does not have a Catholic reference, but a deeply pagan one, Neo-Platonism. The movement that gave birth to that regurgitation of humanism, of mathematical, astronomical, and musical knowledge that will give life to that thing of which everyone talks about, the Renaissance. If we want to describe it under a graphical profile, it is the yin and the yang, black and white, male and female energy, ascending and descending energy. From this association, you can understand how there is a transversality across all cultural declinations, because all the cultural declinations refer to the same knowledge, the knowledge through which reality is told. The problem is that each declination becomes a partial truth. Therefore, being a partial truth and being imposed according to the political ideology of those holding power, it then conditions our daily actions, our knowledge. But it does not correspond at all to what the reality is. In this case, it does not correspond at all to what the art of Renaissance was. Ghirlandaio here, Sistine Chapel. This duality is told by a bird that flies from right to left and one that flies from left to right. In the flight, the two meet. It is exactly the same thing that Raphael's and Tobias' hands do. And it's the exact same thing that Heraclitus told us 4 centuries before Christ. This is the meaning underlying everything. Then from here on, you can modulate and derive any other reading. But everything is based on this, Everything you find in Renaissance art is referred to spirituality and music. Everything. So we've seen how Leonardo's music has been completely distorted. Leonardo had a musical knowledge that was absolute. Perhaps music was the preeminent part of Leonardo's work, of his legacy, but is completely untold, either because inconvenient or because nobody has yet deciphered it. And the way in which this knowledge is misinterpreted sometimes becomes even grotesque. This is a musical canon that is exhibited in the famous museum about Leonardo in Milan. It is presented as a musical canon because it has a wheel through which these canes were spinning and producing music, shooting music. But Leonardo wrote, "Here I make a wheel made of canes as scores with a musical motif called canon. And then I make a wheel with 4 teeth, each tooth instead of a cantor." So whoever has called this thing musical canon had a great imagination, to say the least. It takes much more imagination and more effort in making up a lie than in telling things as they are. It would be enough to look at them with the eyes of a child, which is without all those cultural and mental preconceptions that fill the head of each of us. At that point, everything becomes extremely simple and linear. In music, a canon is a counterpoint compositional technique that employs a melody with one or more imitation of the melody played after a given duration. It's what I told you before. With the lover moves, Leonardo superimposed, creating a dynamic movement, the harmonies that are equal. Making them play with different timing. The greater counterpoint music composer is Bach, which was already mentioned earlier. There's also Gesualdo da Venosa in the previous century. A further century earlier there is Giovanni da Palestrina. What Bach is holding here is a triplex canon, which is a counterpoint composition. Again, what one of those 171 musical rebus is associated to Leonardo in reality is nothing but a triplex canon. And we find the first part written through the notes on the score, a second part written through the letters that are associated in a singular harmony. Note by note, creating a relationship of third, fourth, fifth, and so on. And the third part, that is the most complicated, and that we're still trying to decipher, is the one made with figures. So what we're told being a musical rebus, in reality, it's a canon triplex. We're slowly realizing that Leonardo's musical knowledge was not advanced, it was much beyond. So you can understand how, in a very elementary way, and looking at the documents that have been left with, Leonardo assumed a completely different connotation, not physical but cultural, of knowledge. And I'm not making anything up, it's there to see. Goethe said, "What is the most difficult thing of all? To see with your eyes what lies before them." Why? Because we're really totally bewildered by previous knowledge. We don't go deeper anymore in our analysis. This is the bad habit of today's society. Everything is slogan, everything is opposition. There's no debate, there's no in-depth examination. So what was that musical canon about? What is the most famous musical canon that all children know and resembles so much that item that Leonardo drew? Those music boxes that you can buy in every petrol station or bookshop. Are you sleeping, Brother John? And I wonder, shouldn't it be easier to recognize something that has been in the hands of each of us rather than making up the crap of the musical canon? But unfortunately, this is how things are. And you laugh at the musical canon, but the same happens when the so-called experts talk about Leonardo. Leonardo, as I said, had an absolute musical knowledge. He exceeded in musical knowledge anyone, not only of his era, but also of the following ones. The reference is to Bach.
You hear harmony which is formed by unequal intervals, yet measured according to perfect proportions, and reproduced by movements of the spheres. The grave sounds join the acute ones in ever-changing chords, because the colossal planetary revolutions could not be happening in silence. And nature demands the acute sounds echo at one end, and grave sounds respond at the other. So the world of the stars that has the fastest motion rotates with a hasty Argentinian thrill, while the submitted lunar motion emits slow, cavernous sound. So the spheres produce 7 discrete tones, and the 7-tone number is the core of all that exists. And the man who knew how to imitate on the lyre the concert of heaven have found a way that leads to this sublime realm.
This quote here is from a gentleman who lived a long time ago, who wrote a book that the little boy is reading. The little boy is one of the few pictorial remnants in the Medici Bank of Milan. It's very likely the representation of Leonardo as a child, who reached the Duchy of the Sforza at a very young age, in spite of what we're told. Cicero wrote these words in the De Republica, 10th book. He's telling what happens to the music in its absolute. The music of the spheres, it's not a philosophical concept, but is an astrophysical one. It is the way in which man narrates the vibration that underlies the entire universe. And that universe duality is expressed by contraposition of chords. One other thing, we often hear about the law of the octave. There are people who fill their mouth with this octave law of 432 Hz. In reality, the law of the octave refers to the basic frequency of the Earth, which is the Schumann resonance, which is a 7.83, not an octave law. The septenary number is the core of all that exists. And the men who know how to imitate on the lyre the concert of heaven have found a way that leads to this sublime realm. There have been only 3 people in history that playing the lyre changed the mood of the people. King David, Orpheus, and Leonardo. They did not play it physically, but it's a reference to the knowledge of this music, to the knowledge of that system made up of mathematical and geometrical relations, which this vibration manifests with. Music that is expressed by the solar motion which is the motion of the planet's rotation around the Sun. Clearly, each one has different orbits, different gravitation, and therefore it influences, enriching this harmony, creating those chords, which then are the chords contained in Bach's music. Or in Leonardo's one. We have a complete score from Leonardo on all of these notions of music. And I decided to write a new book about this. I finally found an academic from the conservatory that has finally found a complete synchronicity with all these propositions, jumping on his chair when I showed them to him. So soon we'll come out with a book on this. It will be a very complicated path with these and many other experiences, but all very amusing. But above all, pleasant because they give the possibility to probe and knowledge that, if developed in a correct way, I wish, it will allow the young generations to have a future completely different from what we have today, and perhaps we'll be able to build a more peaceful world. So let's hope we'll make it happen. For Leonardo, while painting was the figuration of material things, music was the figuration of invisible things. Again, this statement, that clearly refers to the vibration compendium, should ring a bell to everyone. The essential is invisible to the eye, but the little prince. Not by chance, the little prince travels, in the original cover made by Saint-Exupéry, with some birds that drag him in a flight. Why? Because music was representing the form of birds, as I showed you earlier in the case of Ghirlandaio. But not because birds are pretty, because when birds sing, they emanate the same vibration, which is clearly recognizable in this Tibetan musical notation. And which is the same vibration that determines the shape of the clouds. This is physics, even if this affirmation will be contested by the keyboard warriors. But this is it. And this is what the ancients knew and what the ancients handed over with absolute rigor, for a very simple reason. Because these laws, that are the laws that underlie nature, are not democratic. Nature is not democratic. You cannot derogate from nature rules, because otherwise, and we've seen it done by men, we make disasters. Because the nature that hosts us is a perfect system. We can only do worse. The one on the left-hand side is defined, even by Pedretti, who was acclaimed as the best among Leonardo scholars, as the playful geometric game. In reality, the flower of life that collects or expresses that vibration compendium that everything refers to. And that's easily readable again in the harmonic structure of a snowflake. And Leonardo wrote, waves of sound, light and water all obey to the same laws. All refers to this absolute supreme law. Pythagoras, and actually the Egyptians much earlier than him, said, the geometry of shapes is solidified music. The vibration determines the form. There is an experiment which is often done by children, but that in reality is a scientific exercise done by Chladni, schematics, where making vibrate a membrane with salt placed on its top, the salt, moved by vibrations, creates geometric shapes. This is the absolute evidence of how vibration determines the shape, And this should remind you how every time we move away from music, intended as a repetition of the music of the spheres, we cause damage to our organism. Diseases are the result of an energy imbalance. Even medical science is becoming more aware of this. The relationships are those described by Pythagoras. By making a monochord vibrate, having heard the bells or the blacksmith beating on the iron, etc., it has determined the ratios of unison, octave, third, fourth, that are represented by the shape. The joint of harmonic waves created by the monochord. They are those shown by the tetractys. Tetractys, then narrated by Raphael in the dispute of the sacrament seen before. And try to see what happens. It is the same identical matrix that gives shape and life not only to a shell, but to everything in the universe. Our DNA, our blood, the leaves arranged along the branch of a plant, everything. The pine cones, everything. It is now clear how deviating from this knowledge produces repercussions not only on our cognitive or cultural ability, but determines negative repercussions on our biological aspect. While once we were so careful in making buildings and cathedrals in a certain way, using colors in another way, or even using words in certain ways, because everything is vibration, and everything that is vibration is then reflected upon us. When we give a name to a newborn child, paradoxically, we're giving him a vibration imprinting. If we know it, then we think about it. If we don't, we just do things randomly. So music, or rather what music represents, is nothing but the vibration genetic matrix of the whole universe, what Leonardo called the motion that is the reason of every life. It is the motion of the planets around the sun, which is the same motion told by Cicero in the De Republica, read earlier by Paula. Interesting, isn't it? But nobody tells it to you. And yet it's written everywhere. And yet it's painted everywhere. And Leonardo knew very well these things. He knew them well, because clearly Leonardo is not, as they say, a self-learner who woke up one day in the countryside, and since he was in the middle of the countryside, he drew landscapes in his painting. Because unfortunately, this is what gets told by the so-called experts. Necessity is the teacher and guardian of nature. Necessity is the theme and inventor of nature and the rule of eternal life. This writing is by Leonardo. The necessity is part of the earth myth, Plato. It is referred to the spindle of Ananke. On the knee of Ananke, the spindle was laid, around which the planet spun, creating this harmonic vibration that was compared to the souls, in order to access the kingdom of heaven. So what happens? We, in our actions, have the duty to observe an absolute rigor towards this vibration. Because otherwise, everything we do against it, we do it wrong. But we owe it, above all, in respect to those who are next to us. Because if she vibrates badly or crooked, she makes me vibrate crooked too. Because we are all part of the one same system. This is why the ancients were so careful to strictly adhere to these instructions. Instructions that have been completely lost. And to what purpose? To follow a partial culture. The same partial culture that caused the drift of our current society. Today most of us live crooked. There's still someone with a straight vibration, but the problem is that he then gets disturbed by those close to him. But this knowledge was widespread, and it is contained in all the paintings. The Timaeus, with Plato, in whose shoes, in the school of Athens, Raphael portrays Leonardo. It is said that Leonardo was excluded from the commission in the Vatican, and he only appeared in this representation. In reality, Leonardo in the Vatican is represented at least 7 or 8 times. Why? Because all these painters, Ghirlandaio, Raphael, Botticelli, recognizing Leonardo the absolute leader in transmitting this knowledge. Because Leonardo was probably the last of the Hierophants, taking the baton from Gemistus Plato. Leonardo was an absolute point of reference, and this is the reason why the Church has always gone against him, to the point of putting on him that mask of hypocrisy, which is what we have opened the lecture with. So when we talk about Leonardo, when we buy books about Leonardo, when we see screenplays about Leonardo, movies, one worse than the other, they're all telling a partial truth. But we leave these same partial truths even when we go, for example, to the Uffizi or Brera to look at paintings. It is the exact same thing, because the knowledge underlying those paintings, and therefore the capability of reading them by what they meant, has been erased. I repeat myself here. This is not a small detail, because it determines in an absolute way our current society. All the defects of our society in its community, political, economical and social form come from this partial reinterpretation. It's the outcome of a power which is not an absolute power of cultural heritage, but is the result of a drifted power, and crooked, like the history of the discovery of the Americas. Who discovered the Americans? No one. It was there, it was inhabited, but it was conquered, reconquered, extorted, not only to the natives, but also to those who went there before Columbus, and many people went there before him. So that mask, I was saying, tells us that Leonardo was born on April 15, 1452, son of Piero da Vinci, notario in Vinci, and of a slave named Caterina. That he was self-taught, that between 10 and 14 years was a pupil of Verrocchio, that he moved to Milan in 1482 to serve Ludovico the Moor. This is what we're told. The strength of this book here is that all these reconstructions that I'm making are supported by detailed documentation found in the various museums and archives. And therefore, there are unquestionable and documental elements that clash with a narrative that is instead dogmatic, because they are dropped from above. And so let's analyze them. Not so much for what concerns Leonardo, but because they describe the evolution of Renaissance history that is completely different. Therefore, we are today a result of a long succession of lies. The date of birth of Leonardo is fixed by Vasari, de Pagave, and D'Agranville between 1443 and 45, and they are the most authoritative biographers of Leonardo. Vasari lived in the 16th century and the other two in the 18th. This is because when Leonardo dies, he is described as being over 70 years old, or over 75 years old, and consequently his date of birth is derived. The only one with a personal experience, because he's the only one who saw Leonardo in life, is Antonio de Beatis, who served the Cardinal of Aragon. He went in 1517 to meet Leonardo in Amboise, just before he died, 2 years before. In 1517, by direct testimony, Leonardo was more than 70 years old. Let's make it 71, so we stay close. So this means that Leonardo at least was born in 1446. This information comes from who has seen him personally. So, how do we get to place Leonardo's birth in 1452 and to link him back to Sir Piero Vinci? At this point, we have to make a distinction we have already anticipated a few times earlier regarding the concept of knowledge. Knowledge is either an enormous opportunity for growth for anyone. It is that thing that we have seen before, referring to the knowledge of the universe, of the vibrations, of astronomy, of the mathematical and geometrical laws that governs it. Or, as instead has become the course of Renaissance, it can be a fact of convenience. What is it convenient to know? Or what is written in schoolbooks text? What is convenient to know? Everything that the dominant culture tells me I have to know. And if you dare tell me something different, someone will attack you immediately. And this is the most deplorable of all things, because it means knowing what is convenient to know. And this is the worst teaching that you can give to the kids. They become intellectually prostituted to those who give them a job, those who promise them a mark, those who promise them the miracles of an advertised product. But the problem is that knowledge is no longer taught anymore, because if you dare, you get attacked. But today we are here trying to do so. Again, we have a problem. They have. The life of Leonardo and all the greatest painters and architects of his time are all told a narrative based on what Vasari wrote in his lives. In 1568, under the privilege and license of Pius V and Cosimo I de' Medici. In there we find written, "Truly admirable and celestial was Leonardo, son of Sir Piero da Vinci, in the erudition and principle of literature. He would have made great profit if he had not been so inconstant and unstable. He's a good kid, but does not commit." Everything here is written with the privilege and license of Pio V and Cosimo I de' Medici. Be careful when you hear about the Medici family. It's really like talking about the Magnani, mine family. My brother and I are distinct individuals. The Medici of the 16th century are not the Medici of the 15th century. So let's not make of the Medici family the same brush. So let's have a look at who Pius V was. He was the third Dominican Pope of history, General Inquisitor of Lombardy, great supporter of the Jesuits and of Cardinal Borromeo, who is the one replacing the Sforza in Milan. In 1571, he created the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, that is the index of all books that can be read or not. Careful, it's 1571, but the order was then cancelled only in the 1960s. In this index ended up people like Battisti, Bevilacqua, Dumas, the father, and Dumas the son. To realize what I mean? To realize what censorship means. He named Cosimo I as Grand Duke of Tuscany. When you go to Florence, remember that the residence of the Medici is not Palazzo Vecchio, but Palazzo Medici Riccardi. Palazzo Vecchio is the residence of Cosimo I. So today the city of Florence is celebrating a lower grade of the family. We have said that in this version of the Lives, Vasari writes, "Truly admirable and celestial was Leonardo, son of Sir Piero da Vinci." Based on this description, Giovan Battista Dei, as the Dei were two, by mere presumption, thinking that Leonardo was the son of the notary Vinci, finds in 1746, so for 3 centuries everyone thought that Leonardo was born in the 40s, but he finds an inscription on the last page of the notary's book of the alleged grandfather, an inscription which says, "On the 15th of April 1442, at 3 o'clock at night, Leonardo is born, son of Sir Piero, my nephew." And this is the reason why today we assume as date of birth the 15th of April 1452. Again, for mere presumption. But again, there are documents that speak. Because about the lives, the one of 1568 and edited by the Giunti family, well known even today, but the version of the 1550, 18 years prior, and edited by Torrigiani, I think, you find the name on the book anyway, writes a completely different thing. It does not write truly admirable Celestia was Leonardo, son of Sir Piero da Vinci, but so admirable and Celestia was Leonardo, nephew of Sir Piero da Vinci, who being truly good uncle and relative to him, helped him in his youth. Again, I speak now to those who are not here, but they are following from home or on YouTube, to those who say the Vasari simply confuse uncle and nephew. Beyond the fact that it's quite anomalous that for a father he stressed the fact of being of help in the youth of a son. It seems redundant to me. In the first version of the Lives, the relationship between Leonardo and Sir Piero is for 5 times referred to as uncle and nephew. 5 times! There is more. There is another text that preceded the Lives. It's the Magliavecchiano Codex, known as the Anonymous Gadiano, made 10 years earlier, most likely, and it states, although he was not a legitimate son of Sir Piero, although he puts the stress on that, he was of his mother, born of a good blood, and again, she was not even a slave, and Sir Piero was not even the father. So we have seen that the cultural heritage of Leonardo is slightly different from what we are told, a tiny bit more complex. Just minor details, isn't it? We've seen that the biographical part of Leonardo's life is shaky, the one that we are told. So let's see when Leonardo goes to Milan. We know that on April 25th, 1483, he is in Milan because he stipulates the contract of the Virgin of the Rocks with the De Predis brother. 25th of April 1483. The one you see at the bottom here is the only autograph signature of Leonardo da Vinci. Any other signature of Leonardo that gets shown to you, and there are many, especially in screenplays, is not the original of Leonardo. So, we get told that Leonardo arrives in Milan on the spring of 1482, on the basis of this letter, which is the famous letter of employment that he would have written to Lodovico the Moor. But he did not write this letter. He obviously did not write it. It is written in a completely different handwriting. And so one wonders, why of this letter we don't have the original copy? Why we don't have the original copy of Leonardo's will? Why we don't have the original copy of Columbus' diaries? How come that all these stories that are given for granted in our schools are not supported by original documentation, but instead by interpretations? The best children face, that is also the toughest for parents, is the one of the why. But it is the one that we all must keep on developing. Why? We have always to ask questions. Those who ask questions have doubts. If you have doubts, you ask yourself questions. By finding answers, you solve your doubts. Nothing can be loved or hated without prior knowledge of it, Leonardo said. So we said we have not the original copy of the resume, but there are a lot of of other documents about when Leonardo went to Milan and why Leonardo went to Milan. That's what interests us the most. Why? Because what pushed Leonardo to go to Milan, I repeat myself, is strongly related to the foundation of our modern society. So it's our duty to know it. Because you have to know the past to understand the present. I didn't come up with this one, it's from a wiser man. So once again, we are rescued by documents. Leonardo was brought to Milan with great reputation to the Duke Francesco, who greatly enjoyed the sound of the lyre to play. And then, a few pages later, and in short order it reached the hands of Francesco, Duke of Milan, being sold to him for 300 ducats. We're talking about Leonardo's musical and pictorial skills in Milan at the time of Francesco Sforza. This is from the Lives, first edition. There is a problem. Francesco Sforza died in 1466. Leonardo must have been to Milan before that, and he went in company of Benedetto Dei, who was the ambassador of the Medici family, who writes in his documents that again, I went to verify personally at the Magliabecchiano library. I was in Milan the year that Francesco Sforza took it with the sword in hand, 1449, and when I took the Medici there, 1465, journey that is celebrated by Benozzo Gozzoli in San Gimignano in the cycle of Sant'Agustin. So there are documents that attest the fact that Leonardo was in Milan in 1465 or before, which justifies the representation of before by Foppa at the Medici Bank, with a child, apparently 8 years old, that read Cicero, not a very common thing. What you see here is a writing by Benedetto Dei, which I've transcribed to facilitate your reading. It was written on June 15, 1480, and it mentions all the people that Benedetto Dei, as ambassador of the Medici family, took to the Milan ruled by the Sforza. We find Leonardo da Vinci. The anonymous Gadiano himself, summarizing the life of Leonardo, mentions the moves made by Leonardo between Milan and Florence, from where we can gather not only that Leonardo was in Milan in the 60s, but that in the 70s, 76 to be precise, he is accused of that fact that he did not commit, that falls within the conspiracy of the Pazzi, etc., etc., for which he was accused of sodomy, along with other people, including a Tornabuoni, thanks to which Leonardo will be able to defend himself. And the anonymous Gadiano specifies that. He said that the accusation pushed him to go to Milan, but that accusation comes, as I told you earlier, from everything that followed the conspiracy of the Pazzi. Conspiracy that not only affects in Florence Giuliano and Lorenzo de' Medici, but it involves also Simonetta Cattaneo Vespucci, the model, lover of Giuliano, who is associated to the Americas. But it also affects Galeazzo Maria Sforza in Milan, in Melzo, and it affects Leonardo. So Leonardo's moves are dictated by political opportunities, by necessities, because the climate in Florence had become extremely hostile, and not only for the events of the Americas, but for that Neoplatonic movement of which Florence made itself the cradle. Something that in Rome was not accepted at all, because Neoplatonism was strongly in contrast with the Catholic foundation and therefore threatened to weaken it. And therefore the Church attacked it heavily. It attacked all its representatives. See the bonfire of the vanities, Savonarola, Inquisitions, and so on. And therefore that knowledge we started with was swept away in exchange for freedom. It was a barter. Our lives, our future, have been bartered, and we know the culprits. They are recognizable and identifiable. However, Leonardo got to Milan much earlier. We mentioned his culture, his history. Let's see now Leonardo's physiognomy. We're used to link Leonardo with a well-defined image of an old, bearded man, with a painter's hat on his head. In reality, again, to speak about Leonardo's portraits means talking about the characters of the time, because what affects Leonardo, under a biographical point of view, it affects all the other Renaissance artists. The one you see here on the left is Francesco Sforza, that leads the cavalcade of the Magi, or rather he follows the one leading the cavalcade of the Magi. But officially he is said to be Cosimo de' Medici. But it's clearly Francesco Sforza. Cosimo de' Medici is represented on the right, in the shoes of an Indio, in the shoes of Pachacutec, the last Inca emperor that died in 1459. When was the painting done? 1459. This one is one of the many evidences for which the Americas have been frequented, not discovered, before Columbus. The same goes for Matthias Corvinus, who leads the procession of the Magi in the Medici Riccardi Palace, which was the residence of the Medici, of Cosimo de' Medici, who is mistaken instead for Lorenzo the Great. Lorenzo is this one, that looks like he's been hit by a truck, and who is obviously completely different. But placing Mattia Corvinus there, it means creating links between the Hungarian world and the Medici and Sforza world. Mind this, Hungary, Italy, we're not far now, Greece, Iran, Iraq, all places where knowledge and culture was highly developed have now been or about to be erased. This is deeply concerning. Anyway, I was saying, Leonardo's physiognomy is used in a totally distorted form. What you see now are Leonardo's representations that do not correspond at all to what he looked like, but are, for its majority, the ones that have been used in the celebration of the 500th anniversary of his death. A papier-mâché celebrating with a physiognomy that does not belong to him. Again, a mask. Even the book written by Walter Isaacson, head of the Aspen Institute, has been head of CNN, that obviously had to write his own book about Leonardo. He has used for cover an unrealistic image of Leonardo, yet we have plenty of Leonardo's portraits, many and of any age. Why? Because Leonardo was recognized in his role of Hierophant since he was born. And therefore there are so many portraits of him. Let me stress it again, there are plenty. The Vitruvian man is Leonardo himself. If you walk around Florence, you have Leonardo statues that are looking at you. In the old sacristy, mausoleum of the Medici family, this one. Bust of a deacon, there by Desiderio Settignano, and no one can guess who it represents. In reality, it's a portrait of a young Leonardo, and his presence in the mausoleum of the Medici family is justified, for reasons that you will discover by reading the book. The one on the left, the same. You walk through Florence, and Leonardo is looking at you. Paradoxically, all the representations included in Leonardo's anatomic drawings are self-portrait. But this one is the most peculiar of all. I found it only a couple of months ago. It was a statue made by Rustici, who was a pupil of Leonardo, probably on a drawing by Leonardo himself. It had been positioned above the baptistry. That is the most important place for the Florence of the time, facing Medici Riccardi Palace. It depicts the sermon of a Baptist. Probably the statues were three, and all three refer to Leonardo. The references to Leonardo's drawing are evident. But this one is peculiar, because the statue is from 1511, and it depicts a Leonardo perfectly superimposable to the sanguine portrait of 1515, preserved in Turin. Why this is important? Not only because it testifies the recognition that Florence had for Leonardo, placing him in the most important place in the city, and therefore recognizing him as an influential character, but also because it tells us that Leonardo's physiognomy in 1511 was much older than what his alleged age, 59, would suggest. This corroborates the fact that Leonardo, as I said before, was born much earlier. But it's not me who says this, it's written in the various documents I've shown you. So, I was saying that there are many portraits of Leonardo. You can find them everywhere. If you think that this is the rambling of one who got passionate about Leonardo and that sees him everywhere, there are elements that go beyond any reasonable doubt. And again, there are elements that assume documentary value. Careful, a document is not exclusively something written. A document can be a vase, it can be an image, it can be a painting. So we know that Leonardo is clearly recognizable by a recurring physiognomy. Leonardo was also recognizable by a slight squint. Which is funny, because last year came out a thesis developed by an American university saying that this strabism was the reason why Leonardo was capable of representing death in his painting. So as he suffered of a squint, he therefore could see better in that. Sadly for them, in Leonardo's treatise of painting, he describes how landscapes must be done, and he clearly says that before doing anything, you have to close one eye. So whether you have a squint eye or not, it doesn't really matter. But those geniuses couldn't get it. The protruding eyes and the dimple in his chin, which are two hereditary characters, which will help us understanding who his real father was. And then he had exanthelasma. The exanthelasma is a fat formation inside the eye. This observation was made in the 70s. This intuition was developed by a Japanese doctor. He went to the Louvre to see the Gioconda, like so many of you, and being an eye doctor, the first thing he noticed there's exanthelasma. The only one who noticed that. It's a pity that then he went on saying, since she had exanthelasma, the Gioconda, the Mona Lisa, suffered from cholesterol. A genius. In reality, the Gioconda is Leonardo's feminine portrait. The portrait of a musician is exanthelasma. It is not by chance that Leonardo is the greatest musician in history. In reality, he was not a musician, he was a connoisseur of music. And this is the evidence that Leonardo, also assuming for a second that here he portrayed Leo Gherardini, which he did not, would have never portrayed her with exanthelasma unless it was necessary to identify a precise person. But there is another element that characterizes the Gioconda, which demonstrates how it is Leonardo's feminist portrait. And again, we have a direct testimony. Paola, we're almost done.
Even from him, for having contracted a certain paralysis on the right hand, much cannot be expected. He has formed a Milanese group that works very well. And although the Sir Leonardo cannot color with his usual delicacy, he can still make drawings and teach others.
This is again the Beatis, when he goes to visit Leonardo in 1517 in Amboise. Leonardo goes in Amboise after having had a terrible experience in Rome. Afflicted, he went to France, to the King of France. In the Gioconda, her right hand has an atrocious ganglion. But again comes two Italian doctors, whose finding went viral around the world, on CNN, BBC, etc. They notice in a drawing preserved in Venice about Heraclitus and Democritus, and recognizing Leonardo in Heraclitus, which was common in the painting of that time, they notice a strange position on Leonardo's hand, which is inside the dress. They link it to a trauma that caused the partial paralysis of Leonardo, once adult, on his left hand. It's a pity for them, not knowing that that sketch was the preparatory for a painting in which the right hand becomes the left hand. But no one challenged them with the fact that the drawing reflects a painting that would dismantle their theory. No one. But the news went viral around the world anyway. While hardly anything about what I'm telling you tonight is getting reported overseas. So again, the Gioconda, we said, not the Mona Lisa, is the portrait of Leonardo's feminine self. It is the representation of his Res-bis, of his spiritual marriage, where the male and the female energy are in perfect harmony. This again leads back to those indications of musical vibration character to which I referred to at the beginning. But then let's ask ourselves why Leonardo was targeted so fiercely. I've said it many times, because Leonardo embodied a different cultural belief, not only for Florence, but for the whole world, and this could not be accepted by the Church. Two other causes that concord to transform knowledge from an individual and collective growth opportunity into a factor of convenience. The spread of Neoplatonism, therefore of a deeply pagan cult linked to the astronomical and natural laws, etc., etc., and the discovery of the Americas, that was not discovered by Christopher Columbus. There is another video made by BioBlue where I document all these things. In the book there is a whole chapter dedicated to this topic. There is infinity of evidence, from the date of the discovery to the details of the shipwreck, etc., etc., that can be found in documents from 1420 onwards. But the discovery of the America strongly conditioned not only the life of Leonardo, not only the envelopment of the Renaissance, but it planted the seed for today's society. So the spread of Neoplatonism, reinforced with Plato at the center of the School of Athens by Raphael, pointing at the sky, pointing at that motion of the stars, and where, according to this cult, man was in full harmony with the laws of the nature and the universe. So the fideistic concept linked to the Supreme God will be challenged in his foundation. And the discovery of the Americas, briefly. Someone talks about the Romans, Carthaginians, the Vikings. No. The land was there, was known in its entirety since ever, and there is an element which resolves any doubt. This map is a planisphere that represents not only all the landmass, but it represents also Antarctica. This presence of Antarctica made some noise because it's void of ice. In reality, it is perfectly superimposable to a planisphere, by adapting an image of Google. So the knowledge of Antarctica, especially the knowledge of Antarctica without ice, makes this representation, but all the representations of the Renaissance, leading back to a period in which Antarctica was accessible to visit and map, or at least its coasts. This would suggest cyclical periods of glaciation and deglaciation. This means that when they show you us on TV the little girl with braids to talk about climate change, they're actually fooling us. Because climate change is cyclical. It's in history. It's always been there. The real issue is the pollution that the capitalist system, taken to its limits, has caused and that is creating problems on Earth. This cannot be said because those who will govern the rebuilding of the new capitalist system wants to link every issue to a climate problem. And the most coward thing that they are doing to us is using our children for this purpose, by taking them into streets to demonstrate for the climate. But the climate is a cyclical fact. This is clear, and it's also demonstrated by these representations that are not at all fictional, because of their precision cannot be questioned, Therefore, the discovery of the America has nothing to do with the Romans, the Vikings, or Columbus. First of all, because, I repeat, they were inhabited by population who had a great civilization, but above all, because its knowledge had been documented for millennia. This representation is made by Leonardo. It's a peculiar representation of the Mediterranean basin made by Leonardo. Why? Because it shows us an anomaly in the representation of Puglia, Italy, that makes us believe that the two representations have the same matrix. Not by chance, the first geographical knowledge arrives to Florence between 1300 and 1400 in the Studium Florentinum. The reason why, then, Paolo del Pozzo Toscanelli and blah blah blah. You will find everything in the book. But this thing is fundamental at first, as the first one who went to America had a friendly approach, to the point that Lorenzo the Magnificent, placed to lead the Medici Signoria, is a mestizo, and probably Ludovico the Moor was a mestizo too. He was testifying the extreme brotherhood between Europe and America, or Amerindian people. A relationship that then, through those who took possession and ownership of the discovery, that was not a discovery, has been spoiled to take possession of the enormous resources that America had. And above all, to control an enormous portion of the world, because the Turks had just defeated at Constantinople, the Byzantine Empire, and therefore the Western Church felt oppressed and sought new territories to control and to indoctrinate through the use of the Dominican order, the dogs of the Lord. Then turned into Jesuits. Jesuits, we have one there, right? This representation is from 1450. Landi House, Milan. If I tell you Landi House in Milan, no one knows what it is, but if I tell you Atellani House, where there is Leonardo's vineyard, everyone knows. But the Atellani House was acquired by the family only in 1492. Before, it was owned by Manfredi Landi, warlord very close to Francesco Sforza. And this representation includes North and South America, Antarctica, Australia and New Zealand, and two submerged islands, 1450. But the evidences are many more. I clearly cannot show you all of them, or we'll be going home in 10 years' time, but I can plant the seed. You'll find something in a book, something is written in various articles, etc., etc. This representation is by Piero della Francesca, 1451. Again, there is a portion of America hidden behind Sigismund of Hungary. Hence again the Hungarians and Pandolfo Sigismondo Malatesta. The peculiarity of this representation, unlike the one before, is its geographical precision. There is a small lake in Florida. The coasts are made in such a precise way that it cannot have been made with a sextant. And above all, it cannot have been made with a sextant in 1451. There is an area of the Great Lakes on the top. There is the Delaware, the Bay of Hudson, discovered by Verrazzano in 1522. It's funny to see that in Florence, on the house where Verrazzano lived, there is written, "In 1522 we discovered Hudson Bay, thus demonstrating that even the Florentines could be great navigators." Clearly they went there a century earlier. References to the America are contained in all the most important paintings of the Renaissance. Pisanello, Beato Angelico, Piero della Francesca, Benozzo Gozzoli, Ghirlandaio, Botticelli, Leonardo, Baccio Baldini. Why? Because the relationship with the Americas was fundamental in the political and economic development of Renaissance. One cannot study Renaissance without studying these things. One cannot study economic and politics of today without studying these things. I understand that the level of some MPs today is quite low, but you have to start from here. The same goes for the Neo-Platonism knowledge. This painting is the Spring of Botticelli. If you go to the Uffizi, they only tell you, "Oh, this is the Spring of Botticelli." But nobody tells you that the head of the Virgin is inscribed in two lungs, described by the fronts of the trees. Why? Because the lungs are linked to the function that branches and leaves have of exchanging oxygen. But above all, this had already been done by Leonardo, the linkage between fronts and lungs, so Botticelli did nothing but copy him. But why did he place it there? Why did he place the head of the spring impregnated in an immaculate way, therefore spiritual? Because there is where the thymus gland lies, corresponding to the fourth chakra, corresponding to the color green. And all go repeating these words without knowing what they mean. In reality, Leonardo, or more in general, the Renaissance men, identified in the thymus the presence of the spiritual side. That's why in most of the Renaissance painting there is a referral to the sternum to identify the thymus. Have you been told this at the Uffizi? Crivelli. Crivelli's hand is very peculiar because it becomes a way of expressing not only the Res-bis, but the spiritual marriage. That is, the conjunction between the male element, the third finger, and the feminine element, fourth finger. United, they give life to the marriage, and therefore to the regenerated man, the new man, the five, the Son, the Christ, where the male and female energy are perfectly in balance. It is the expression of spirituality, of purity. And so the same thing can be noticed in the baptism of Christ by Verrocchio. The same thing, in a different form, is found in the statue of the Moses by Michelangelo, which is Michelangelo's Gioconda. With one hand it makes the number 3, with the other hand it makes the 4. And he has the horns that are symbol of light, of spirituality. In fact, Michelangelo portrayed himself in the Moses. Let's look at this peculiar. When Verrocchio made this painting, he wrote Ecce Agnus Dei, adding the letter I and with a D backwards. I mean, it wouldn't have taken long to spot it. He was surrounded by geniuses like Pico della Mirandola, Marsilio Ficino, etc. a smack on the head, he would have corrected it. Why they didn't? Because the Agnus Dei, Lamb of God, in reality comes from the Agnos of the Greeks, the chaste and pure element. During the spring, a will derivative was given to women who abstained from sexual activities. Then the Agnos for the Greek is the symbol of purity. That's why the Agnos is associated with the Pythagorean greeting. The hieros gamos, expression of hierogamia. But when the Romans translated from Greek to Latin, they made it become the story of the Lamb of God. And therefore, what do we do in Easter? We kill lambs. This is another thing that you won't be told at the Uffizi. So everything that is developed by Renaissance movement is an ancient knowledge that all population out from religious mythologies, also sometimes within the religious mythology, knew very well. Why? Because the goal of life is to make your heartbeat match the beat of the universe, to match your nature with nature. This is a quote from Joseph Campbell, an American essayist. But in reality, that's what the nature does without anyone giving her an instruction. She does it spontaneously. She does it because she obeys to the natural laws, which is the most perfect system ever made. But the man who thinks to be smart says, "Oh no, I want to do it my own way." In the past, music became nothing more than the element or the instrument that was used to elevate oneself, to resonate in conjunction with the universe, so that, as Torquato Tasso said, music is one of the ways through which the soul returns to heaven. It is the reason why David played the lyre, or Phelim played the lyre. When I tell these things, they say I'm crazy. But this is how people's mind works. Slogan, rejections. They feel threatened by this knowledge because it means questioning everything. It means feeling naked, and people don't like to feel naked. Because we are educated to be always dressed. The first thing to do is to remove the armor, right? And I have to experience this rejection every day. If you like, we're organizing tours both around Lecco, where Leonardo set all of his paintings where there is a recognizable landscape, except for one, and around in Florence, precisely to reinterpret in this way Renaissance art, and the places where Leonardo lived and painted. These are the words used by Leonardo to express his irritation towards the academics. A bit similar to what I've been telling you so far. Please go ahead.
I know very well that, not being literatus, to some presumptuous person, it would seem reasonable to criticize me for being an unliterate man. Foolish people! They do not know that I could, as Marius said to the Roman patrician, reply by saying, "Those who make themselves proud of other studies, they will not consider mine." They will say that, not being literatus, I cannot articulate well what I want to debate. They do not know that my studies come more from experience than from other people's words. Words that were master to those who well wrote them, and for master I will take them, and I will add in any circumstance.
But I want to close as I always do. As my Lato says, as I always answer to anyone who calls me crazy, Alice in Wonderland. All the best are crazy. Thank you.